Rumpelstiltskin always says that magic comes with a price. But for this price, you can get a nice piece of jewelry. Use code ONCEPOD for 10% off your first order at Unusual Magic Jewelry on Etsy. Click the link in the description.
Hello, and welcome to the Once Again podcast. We are your hosts, Ashley and Jason. In today's episode, we will be discussing the novel A Game of Thrones from chapter 18, Catelyn 4, to chapter 22, Arya 2. These are the corresponding book chapters to the episode 3 of Game of Thrones, Lord Snow. We will attempt to keep spoilers to a minimum in this episode. However, Jason and I have already read all 5 published books in the Song of Ice and Fire series, so it is possible we may discuss some spoilers in covering this material.
All right, so let's dive in. We start off with chapter 18, Catelyn 4. Our POV character is Catelyn Tully, and the location is King's Landing aboard the Storm Dancer in Blackwater Bay. As their ship, the Storm Dancer, prepares to dock in King's Landing, Catelyn is joined on deck by Sir Roderick Cassel. Catelyn notes that Roderick looks much better than he has for days. Roderick has been chronically seasick throughout the voyage, forcing him to shave his befouled cheek whiskers. After Captain Moro Tomidis leaves them, Catelyn and Roderick discuss how to go about their investigation of the dagger. Catelyn suggests speaking to the Red Keep's Master-at-Arms, Sir Aaron Sadagar, who may recognize the weapon. Roderick reminds Catelyn that they must be very careful that she is not recognized. This brings Lord Peter Baelish, the King's Master of Coin, to Catelyn's mind. Baelish, still known by the nickname Littlefinger given to him by her brother Edmure, was raised with her at Riverrun as her father Hoster's ward. They had been close until Peter had challenged Catelyn's betrothed, Brandon Stark, for her hand. Brandon had only spared Peter because Catelyn had pleaded for his life. After his recovery, Peter had been sent away, and Catelyn had not seen him since. Roderick proposes that he go to the Red Keep alone, because without his whiskers, he is unrecognizable, even to the few who might know him. As they disembark, Catelyn and Sir Roderick move into a modest old inn suggested by the ship's captain. After Roderick leaves, Catelyn tries to get some sleep, but is woken by the city watch of King's Landing. They show her a seal depicting a mockingbird in gray wax, the sigil of Peter Baelish. As she prepares to accompany the soldiers, who do not recognize her, Catelyn wonders how Peter knew she was in King's Landing and settles on the Storm Dancer's captain as the culprit. Catelyn is escorted to a tower room occupied by Peter, where Catelyn asks him how he knew she was in the city. Peter replies that Varys knows everything that happens in the city. He does admit, however, that Varys does not know the reason for Catelyn's visit. Catelyn lies that she merely yearned to see her husband and daughters. Peter does not believe this for a moment and asks Catelyn to let him help.
Yeah, I wouldn't believe it either. I'm not quite sure why she thought, I just yearn to see my husband and daughters. It really hasn't been that long.
Yeah, it's been 2 weeks or whatever, 3 weeks, maybe a month.
In terms of how long some of these characters go without seeing each other, please.
Yeah. Before Catelyn can answer, they are joined by Varys. After profuse courtesies, Varys asks to see the dagger. Catelyn is astonished by Varys's knowledge of things no one could possibly know and produces the dagger for inspection. Upon examination, Peter realizes it once belonged to him until he lost it betting on Sir Jaime Lannister in the tourney on Prince Joffrey's name day. Peter explains that when Jaime was unhorsed by Sir Loras Tyrell, Peter's dagger was won by Tyrion Lannister. Now this is... Oh, go ahead.
This is one of those chapters where, she clearly is yeah, I haven't seen Peter in so long. Since he fought my betrothed, Brandon Stark, that was so many years ago.
Mhm.
She's yeah, I could probably trust him when, talking to Sir Roderick about it. What do you mean you don't know him?
Right.
Then, like, how old are the boys? Like,
Oh, like Rob,
yeah.
14, about to be 15.
So, like, let's say it's been like 16, 17 years,
Right.
like, ish, right?
Yeah.
So,
Peter could be a totally different person than the person that she knew.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
like when I'm thinking that, I'm like, I'm gonna be 31 soon, and like 16, 17 is like half my age. I am not the same person I was at like 16, 17 years ago. I was a child. Like, this
Right.
is the same kind of thing. Like,
Mm.
when this was going on, they were mere teenagers, basically.
Well, luckily for book readers like us, characters like Peter Baelish and Severus Snape never really grow up from when they're teenagers. They fall in love with one girl, and that's it for the rest of their lives. It's just that one girl. Nothing else matters.
Nothing could hold a candle to Catelyn Stark ever.
Mhm. Until he sees Catelyn's daughter, who's even prettier than Catelyn was, and then he's like, "Oh, hello." That's literally what he does. He sees her, stands in front of her, stares at her, and he's like, "Oh, hello, you're Catelyn's daughter." But we'll get to that in a
Like,
little.
awkwardly touches her hair or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But this chapter has some similarities to what happens in the show, but is also different. We never get the Storm Dancer, the ship in the show. I actually kind of like the way that it's done in the show, where Catelyn's like, "Oh, no one's gonna know who I am," and then
And
literally
like
yeah,
immediately.
the next line is someone being like, "Lady Stark," and she's like, "Oh, okay, all right." But everything else is kind of similar. Varys, Peter asking her
I
about the
think this is just
dagger.
a more drawn out version
Mhm,
of what we get in the show, because I
mhm.
think this would have taken way longer to show if they wanted to show it in the show. And why do that?
And there's a little caveat, or not a caveat, but a little bit of background after Peter and Brandon dueled, and Peter essentially is nearly dying because Brandon does cut him from his stomach up to his chin, I believe, and he's recuperating at River Run. That, spoilers, is the time period where Peter and Liza hook up together. So, and I believe he was under Milk of the Poppy and thought that it was Catelyn, and even to this day still believes that it was Catelyn that he hooks up with, but it was actually Liza. And then he gets sent away from River Run for reasons we'll discuss in later books. Catelyn just assumes it's because he fought Brandon, but it's something else. So let's move on to chapter 19, Jon 3. Our POV character is Jon Snow, and the location is Castle Black. Jon is training with the other recruits under Castle Black's Master at Arms, Sir Alistair Thorne. Jon is by far the most skilled swordsman, and during a sparring match, he accidentally injures Gren. Disgusted with the recruits, Thorne calls an end to the training for the day. Jon knows that Thorne dislikes him, but that he dislikes the other boys more. Thorne mercilessly berates them all and has given Jon the moniker of Lord Snow in mockery of Jon's bastard status. To Jon's annoyance, everyone has taken up using the name.
I mean, I would be annoyed too, He wanted to get away from being the bastard, basically, which is all he was really at Winterfell. And now here it's, once again, he's the
Yeah,
bastard child.
yeah. And Alistair Thorne is pretty much a jerk in the early books. Kind of
Yep.
comes around a little bit later on, but he's a jerk here. He's a jerk on the show for certain, but he kind of comes around a little bit in the later books. Jon has found Castle Black cold and the people colder. He has no friends among 20 recruits and finds that he despises them more as time goes by. Jon resents that nobody but Tyrion Lannister told him that the wall would be like this. The fact that even his father never told him makes it hurt all the worse. Even Jon's uncle Benjen seems to have abandoned him, becoming a very different man who spends all of his time among the high officers. 3 days after arriving at the wall, Jon had pleaded to be allowed to come on a ranging with his uncle. Benjen had told him that he was just a boy who had to earn the right to go. Benjen also explained that while he loved his family, the men of the Night's Watch are his true brothers. The next morning, Benjen had smiles, but not for Jon, telling him that they would speak when he returned. Everyone says that to Jon. Like, we'll talk when I get back, and I'm sure nothing bad's
Also,
gonna.
like, It's really annoying that none of them were like upfront with John about this at any point. Like none of them really, really sat down to be like, no, this is what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like Benjamin was like, oh, the wall is hard. Like, he said things would be different, but he didn't explain like, I'm not going to be able to give you special treatment. I'm not going to do this.
Yeah. I kind of feel like all the Stark children were misled on what the world's really like. Like if you think about, granted, they're all young still. Like
Yeah.
they're much younger than their show counterparts. So we have to keep that in mind. But when in a previous Catelyn chapter, like Rob and Theon were both like, "Oh, is it going to go to war? We're ready to fight. Like, I'll call the banners and we'll go fight the Lannisters." Like, they think like they're going to be these big heroes. They don't think about what war is actually like and what it could mean. And
Yeah, until way later in this book, and then
r-
it's like, oh,
right. And Sansa, she's very clearly like just a little princess that was raised on stories of nobles and how great they are and everything. Like it seems like all the Stark children weren't prepared for the world as it really is. Like you can make an argument about Catelyn and Ned being bad parents in that regard, especially to like John and Rob, who are the oldest. Well, obviously Catelyn's a bad.
especially like I get there, like especially because they're so like divorced from the rest of their world because they are in the north where no
Right.
one really goes. Like they don't go to court, they don't go see other things. Like none of these kids have been outside
Mm-hmm.
like of the Winterfell, like greater Winterfell area, I assume. So like
Maybe that's why we do get the argument about Bran being too young to go see the execution. Like maybe I don't know. Like actually, do we get that in the books? I'm trying to remember now. I
no, I
think
think we don't get that argument in the books, but like I think we get like a passing mention like Catelyn thought it was too
yeah,
soon for Bran to be going. Like
yeah. But like none of these kids are prepared for the world as it is, and you would especially think John and Rob should be the most. Like they're the oldest. Rob's the heir to Winterfell. Like he has. Like, if his father just dropped dead of a heart attack one day, he would be the Lord of Winterfell, and
yes.
he has like no understanding of what this world is really like. Eh,
And like also, like I said, they don't know what's outside. Like usually, like we talk about some of the other characters taking wards. Why were none of these kids already like sent as wards elsewhere?
right.
Like why haven't they been sent to the Eyrie before or River Run to like go with their uncle or like go with their grandfather? Like
Yeah.
you would think these had like that they would have seen other things. Why weren't any of the kids already like wards at King's Landing? Like if Robert is basically a brother to Ned, why is none of the kids down there already? Like
And if you don't even want to send them that far, send one or two of them to the Karstarks. Like they're your
yeah.
extended family and they're not too far from Winterfell. Like I don't know.
My point being is they haven't seen literally any of the world and like they have again, they have River Run, which is family, they have the Eyrie, which is family, like they have plenty of other places to go that are much further south than Winterfell
Mhm.
and much more in the like heat of the action, as it were.
Agreed. Well, c'est la vie. But going back into the plot, John goes to his sleeping cell to be with Ghost, thinking about how much he misses his family. His thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of Gren, Toad, and two other recruits. All of them are brutes and bullies sent to the wall for crimes. After Gren insults John's mother, a short fight breaks out that soon has John on the ground. However, before the boys can hurt John, Doyle Noy, the smith, intervenes. After the others leave, Noy tells John that the Night's Watch has the need of every man and that there is no honor in killing boys like Grin. When John insists that they insulted his mother, Noy points out that them saying it doesn't make it true. When Noy reminds John that he is in the Night's Watch for life, John reflects angrily on the fact that Doyle Noy had had a life before taking the Black. He feasted and wenched and fought in battles, only taking the Black after losing an arm during the siege of Pike.
Okay, but what's annoying about John being annoyed by this fact is we know because John says in later chapters that he hasn't really taken the Black yet. Like
Mm-hmm.
he has not taken the vows. He can leave.
Right.
So him being like, "Oh, I haven't gotten to experience anything," like you can go to Molestown and do whatever you want right now, brah. Like,
Yeah,
go ahead and leave.
true.
Like John could theoretically do whatever John wants here.
And I'm sure if he was to even go back to Winterfell at this time, it's not like Rob is going to be like, "Oh no, get out of here." Like Rob's going to be like, "Hey, welcome back, bro." Like, yeah. And Catelyn's not there to bully him at the moment, so I don't know. John's just being his usual emo self. John claims that the others hate him because he is better than them, but Noy insists that they hate him because he thinks he is better. Noy then calls John a bastard and a bully. Being called a bully surprises John because his attackers were all older and bigger than him. Noy explains that John has humiliated them and shamed the other recruits, who had no formal training in swordsmanship, whereas John was trained by an anointed knight. John starts to feel ashamed, but is still angry. Noy tells him to accept his life on the wall and reconsider how he treats his companions, or else to sleep with a dagger by his bed. As he leaves, John looks up at the wall, a massive blue-white cliff of ice that fills up half the sky and dwarfs Castle Black beneath it. The wall is the largest structure built by men, according to Benjen, and the most useless thing, according to Tyrion. Yeah, Tyrion's great. Older than the Seven Kingdoms, to John, the wall seems to represent the edge of the world. Tyrion interrupts John's look up at the wall by commenting that it makes you wonder about what lies beyond. Since arriving, John has seen little of Tyrion, who has been an honored guest among the high officers. When Tyrion asks John if he is curious about what lies beyond the wall, John replies that there is nothing special, but inside wishes he would have ridden with his uncle Benjen on a ranging. Tyrion calls him Lord Snow by mistake. John objects, but Tyrion asks him if he would prefer to be called the Imp, and reminds John to make his weakness his strength by accepting it.
Tyrion is such a good character.
Oh, yeah.
Just take Lord Snow and walk with it, man. They're gonna
Yeah.
call you it. Deal with it.
I remember watching an interview with George R. R. Martin once where he said that he wishes he was as smart as Tyrion is. And then he goes, well, I guess I am as smart as Tyrion is because I write his words for him. He goes, but it takes me 2 or 3 months to come up with something where it takes Tyrion 2 seconds. So we all wish we were as smart as Tyrion is. And then Tyrion asks about Ghost, and John tells him that he chains the dire wolf in the old stables during training, but that the rest of the time he stays with John in his sleeping area in Hardin's Tower. Tyrion says he thought those buildings were abandoned, but John explains that since most of the unmanned castle is abandoned, nobody cares where a person sleeps. He continues on to tell Tyrion that he sleeps alone because the others are afraid of Ghost. Tyrion.
And here we learn that John is also a loner, avoiding all the other boys. No wonder they think John is just yeah, I'm better than you. I can't even sleep with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Tyrion declares that the others are wise, then mentions that Benjen Stark is late returning from his ranging. John recalls that his uncle was supposed to be back by his name day. So I guess John and Rob, well, at least John is 15 now. John recalls that his uncle was supposed to be back by his name day, which is now a fortnight past. Tyrion says that he has heard that a great number of rangers have disappeared recently. In the common hall, John gets food and chooses a spot away from the other recruits, and Tyrion sits opposite him. Sir Alistair interrupts John's conversation to tell him that the Lord Commander wants to speak with him about a message concerning his half-brother. Tyrion suspects the worst and gives John his sympathy. John races to the commander's keep, where Lord Jorah Mormont gives him a message from Robb at Winterfell. The message explains that Bran has woken up, but is now a paraplegic. John, overjoyed that Bran will live, rushes back to tell Tyrion. I believe he actually picks Tyrion up and spins him around, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
I think he does.
Yeah. And in his joy, John also apologizes to Grin and offers to show him how to defend against the move that injured him. Sir Alistair sarcastically remarks that he would have an easier time teaching his wolf to juggle than to train Grin to fight. John replies that he will take that wager as he would love to see ghosts juggle. All the all the men in the hall, including Grin, begin to laugh. Sir Alistair clenches his fist in anger, and John realizes he has made himself a lifelong enemy.
It's because Sir Alistair just doesn't like people,
Yeah.
especially the children. Again, everybody hates children in this series.
I mean, Sir Alistair especially hates John because he's Ned Stark's son. And we don't find this out until later books, but Sir Alistair was a Targaryen loyalist. And that's why he went to the wall, because he refused to bow to Robert, or to bend the knee to Robert. And he chose to take the black instead.
What's so interesting to me is how many people hate Ned just from like things that went on during the war.
Yeah.
Like lots of old grudges. And again, all the kids should know about these things. Well, like Ned sent John to the wall. Like he should have been like, hey,
I mean,
you're probably going to run into some people there who aren't going to like me. So they're not going to like you.
I mean, but if you really think about it, if Ned and Jon Arryn hadn't come to Robert's side during Robert's rebellion, he would have been crushed. Like, Ned brought the full power of the North, and Robert Arryn brought the Eyrie, obviously, and like
brought the Vale, basically, yeah.
Or yeah, I'm sorry, brought the Vale. It like if it had just been Robert on his own, the Targaryen forces would have crushed him. Like, Tywin Lannister would have joined up with the Targaryens immediately.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And like, yeah, he would have been crushed. So it really is because of Ned, and especially like marrying Catelyn and then Jon Arryn marrying Lysa, that they were able to beat the Targaryens. So if you're a Targaryen loyalist, you really do hate Ned Stark, But moving right along to chapter 20, Eddard 4. Our POV character is Eddard Stark, and the location is King's Landing. Ned arrives in King's Landing, tired and ready for a meal and a hot bath. Instead, he is immediately informed by the royal steward that there is an urgent meeting of the small council that he must attend. After momentarily losing his temper, Ned decides that it is best not to offend the council on his first day in the capital. Therefore, he tasks his own steward to see that his daughters are guided to their rooms and that Arya is not allowed to go exploring. In borrowed clothes, his are still packed, Ned arrives to find 4 members of the council waiting for him: Littlefinger, the Master of Coin; Varys, the Master of Whispers; Renly Baratheon, the Master of Laws; and Grand Maester Pycelle. And
go ahead. Note here that the difference here is that he wanted to get changed.
Yeah.
Made sure to get nicer clothes on.
Yeah.
Before heading to camp.
Yeah, Ned in the book is much more lordly than he is on the show. Like and it's a big deal to him that he's like, oh, I'll have to borrow clothes, and like to be.
He's very by the books, which does, right. That is very much his character, even in the show. But yeah. I think, it just makes it easier not having to do these small things. But yeah, in the book, he needs to look clean and look good. Like, he's not going to just show up right from the road. Like,
I think the show depiction of it, of like even having the steward say to him, oh, do you want to change your clothes before going to the meet? And Ned just takes off his riding gloves. Like, it shows this version of Ned is a hardened northerner. Like, he doesn't care about the formalities and all that.
I think in the TV show we get much more warrior Ned versus the Lord of Winterfell.
Right. Yeah.
Which Ned is both of those things. He is a battle-hardened warrior, but he is also the Lord of Winterfell. Mm-hmm. And he's not supposed to be the Lord of Winterfell. And you hear him often kind of say, like, this isn't supposed to be my job. Like, I'm not doing this very well. So I think a lot of his need to be the Lord and look the part of the Lord is simply because he wasn't expecting to be in that role to begin with.
Yeah. It's interesting. Maybe we'll discuss it at the end. I guess we could discuss it now. If Brandon hadn't died and became the Lord of Winterfell, he would have married Catelyn, blah, 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 all that stuff. I wonder what Ned would have ended up doing. Like, he probably would have been hand of the king right from the beginning. Like, he would have gone to King's Landing with Robert. and been down there and everything.
Probably because it would have made more sense for Jon Arryn to stay in the Eyrie and stay with the Vale than with his stuff versus Ned not taking. Like, Ned would have been free to do whatever.
Yeah, like marry Ashara Dane and have children with her and stuff.
I mean, true.
Which, if Robert then married Cersei, I guarantee there would have been some cat fighting between Cersei and Ashara. Cersei would have been like, "No, I'm prettier than her." You know it's true.
I just imagine them sitting there like, "Your hair looks good today, Ashara."
Yeah. Well,
kind of thing.
Doesn't Ashara have purple eyes, if I'm not mistaken?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, because she has some Valyrian blood in her as well. But all right, let's get back into the plot. The simpering eunuch Varys immediately expresses sorrow over the troubles on the road and assures Ned that they are all praying for Prince Joffrey's recovery. Ned coldly informs him that the prince grows stronger every day. There's also mention, it's not in my notes here, but Varys, when we see him as a member of the small council, he's covered in makeup, particularly like powder. He has powder all over himself, even on his hands. And like when he shakes Ned's hand is covered in powder that Varys wears. Yeah. When he sees Renly, Ned is struck by how much he looks like a younger Robert. Littlefinger immediately quips that Renly is much better dressed, having spent more on clothes than many ladies of the court. Upon introducing himself to Ned for the first time, Littlefinger mentions that Catelyn had most likely mentioned him before. Ned recalls that Littlefinger also knew his brother Brandon, adding that Brandon mentioned him more often and with some heat. Ned's not smart, but he had a nice exchange there with Littlefinger. Littlefinger responds that he would have thought heat did not suit the Starks, who are rumored to be made of ice and to melt south of the neck. Ned replies that he does not plan on melting anytime soon. After a short greeting to Grand Maester Pycelle, Ned asks after the other members of the council and is told that Stannis Baratheon left for Dragonstone shortly after the king went north, and that both Sir Barristan Selmy and King Robert are still riding through the city. When Ned suggests they wait, Renly explains that Robert finds the details of coin and crops boring and rarely bothers to attend. Then Renly says the king sent him ahead to convene the council to handle an urgent matter, and Littlefinger produces a sealed letter for Ned.
I'd also like to say here that this is like the first mention we get of Stannis, and we don't really get a lot of mentions of Stannis in the TV show the same way that like Stannis is kind of always coming up of like, but why is he in Dragonstone? Why is Stannis not here? Like,
yeah, we don't really get Stannis on the TV show until season 2 and going further, but he's even though he's an absent character from this first book, he's a much bigger character in the book, and everyone's wondering what's going on with him,
what he's up to, why he's not there. And like we do get hints in later chapters about exactly why he's not there, what he was up to prior before leaving, and what he's probably doing, what he is doing on Dragonstone. Like,
and for anyone, well, I guess I should mention Dragonstone is east of King's Landing. It's where, when the Targaryens first came to Westeros, that they, landed. And it's, not landed because that's King's Land, but
it's the seat of Targaryen power. Is what it is.
And I think, if I remember correctly, Dragonstone was technically part of Valyria. Like, it's east of Westeros, but it's closer to Westeros than it is to Essos. But it was still part of Valyria, and that's why the Targaryens went there. There was a Targaryen hundreds of years ago who predicted Valyria would be destroyed. So the Targaryens picked up and moved to Dragonstone. And then Aegon the Conqueror comes around and says, you know what? Westeros is kind of a mess. I'm going to fix that. Let me and my sister wives just fly some dragons over, and boom, one kingdom, and I'm its king.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And the reason that it's Stannis's is because Robert gave it to Stannis after they defeated the Targaryens, which it's weird because Stannis took that as an insult.
I think the problem is like he assumed like he is technically the Lord of Storm's End is what he should be, because he is the older brother.
Yeah, what he wanted Storm's End too. And if we're going into all the details, during Robert's rebellion, Stannis stayed at Storm's End during a siege and held it for a year. He kept like everyone out from getting into it.
Yeah.
And he thought he was going to get Storm's End as a reward, but Robert gave him Dragonstone instead. And from Stannis's perspective, it was an insult because Dragonstone is just like this barren land in the middle of the ocean. You can't grow crops, you can't do anything like that. Whereas Storm's End is much nicer. However, Robert thought that it was not an insult. Like he was like, no, like it's the ancestral home of the Targaryens, and the crown prince is supposed to have Dragonstone. Like I'm giving it to you, like being like, oh here, like have this great honor. It's Dragonstone, and he ended up giving Storm's End to Renly, which ticked off Stannis. So it's all a complicated mess, but
Yeah, I think a lot of the Stannis stuff is people just misunderstand Stannis and
yeah.
like.
Well, I to go more in, we should do character profiles. We talked a while ago about doing character profiles for Once Upon a Time. I think we should do it for Game of Thrones as well. It's going to be a lot of work, but Stannis is a very fascinating character, in my opinion. And I believe the last time he ever laughed was before he saw his parents die. Like he literally watched his parents die at sea and never got over.
Never laughed again.
Yeah, he never recovered from it. But let's dive back into the plot. The king's letter contains an order that a tourney be held in honor of Ned's appointment as Hand of the King. Ned is incredulous and not particularly happy with this extravagance being held in his name. The prizes alone total 90,000 gold dragons, and the costs are sure to run high as well. When Ned questions whether the treasury will bear the expense, Littlefinger reveals that the crown is already over 6 million gold pieces in debt, half of it to the Lannisters. Ned is shocked. The Targaryens left a treasury overflowing with gold. He cannot believe that Jon Arryn allowed Robert to beggar the realm, but the council explains that while Lord Arryn was a prudent man, Robert did not always listen. Ned insists that this tourney is something that the realm cannot afford and declares that he will consider it later, then leaves abruptly. As Ned proceeds towards the Hand of the Tower, reflecting on the miseries of the last fortnight of the journey south, he is intercepted by Littlefinger, who tells him he is going the wrong way. After a long journey through the Red Keep, Ned eventually realizes that Littlefinger is not leading him towards the tower. Littlefinger explains that he is leading Ned towards his wife, but Ned does not believe him. Eventually, Littlefinger brings him to the foot of a bluff outside the castle, where they mount onto waiting horses and ride into the city. I didn't put this in my notes, but they also have to climb down this mountain or like a peak for a little while. And in the chapter, Ned mentions like how quickly Littlefinger can do it, and like it's impressive how fast he is. But moving right along, Littlefinger leads Ned to a brothel that he owns and tells him his wife is waiting inside. Ned is furious at being taken all this way to a brothel and holds a knife to Littlefinger's throat, claiming his brother was too kind. He is, yeah.
I see why he takes it as an insult, but doesn't believe Littlefinger. Like,
yeah. Well, first he leads him on this ridiculous path through the Red Keep and everything. And we have to keep in mind how much larger all the castles are in the books than they are on the show. So he goes through this ridiculous journey, and he's tired from both riding and going through this. And then Littlefinger's like, oh yeah, your wife is in this brothel right here. And Ned gets understandably very ticked off. But Ned is interrupted by a man he eventually recognizes as Sir Roderick Cassel, disarming his suspicions. Littlefinger leads Ned upstairs to meet with Catelyn, explaining that a brothel is such a good hiding place because it is so unlikely. After embracing and exchanging news with Catelyn, Ned sees the scars on her hand, and she places the Valyrian steel dagger used against Bran in his hands. However, Ned cannot understand why Tyrion Lannister would have attempted to murder Bran, and neither can we. Littlefinger states that the reason is obvious, that Tyrion would have never acted alone. Ned tries to assure himself that Robert could not have been involved in this, but he remembers all the horrid things the king has either supported or ignored. Queen Cersei, on the other hand, Ned has no trouble believing to be responsible. Littlefinger reminds him that to accuse either is treason, but that if they can find proof of Cersei's involvement, it is possible the king will listen.
I
Ned,
hate that line because it so implies that, like, yeah, the king will just get rid of Cersei because he just doesn't want her.
yeah, well, he kind of doesn't, but he owes, $3 million to her father already. He's stuck in this relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ned feels that he should take his case and the dagger directly to the king, but Littlefinger reminds him that there is no solid proof that Tyrion was involved. Then Catelyn explains that she has told Littlefinger about their suspicions concerning Jon Arryn's death, and that Littlefinger has promised to help them learn the truth. When Ned asks how much Varys knows about all of this, he is told that Varys has not been told, but Catelyn warns that the man knows things no normal man has any way of knowing. Ned then asks Littlefinger to give them time alone. Littlefinger asks if they want a bedchamber, but Ned tells him that will not be necessary. He just needs a little time. Catelyn goes to Littlefinger and tells him that she appreciates his efforts and has found a brother that she had thought was lost. Ned is not so confident that Littlefinger can be trusted, but says nothing. After Littlefinger leaves, Ned gives Catelyn instructions for his bannermen to fortify Moat Cailin and to keep a watch over Theon Greyjoy in case his father's fleet is needed. He hopes it will not come to war and that Robert will believe him when he finds out what happened.
What's interesting here is how much Littlefinger's playing them. Like, don't go to Robert yet.
Right.
Because he knows that, like, he'll be found out more so out of everything.
Mm-hmm. You're right. And also, Ned's thoughts here, or instructions that he gives Catelyn to fortify Moat Cailin and to keep Theon Greyjoy close. She doesn't do either of those things.
No,
And,
she
and
doesn't.
yeah, and it costs the Starks like dearly in the war that they eventually do end up fighting.
I didn't even think about it that she doesn't do either of those things because she never gets back to Winterfell to do those things.
Right. But even like the places that she does make it to, she could at least send a raven or something, or send Sir
I
Roderick.
suppose. I think the problem is, like, by the time she's like far enough north to like consider doing anything about it, like now she's stuck with dealing with the Tyrion situation.
Yeah, you're right. Well, we'll discuss it when it arises. But I just think it's funny that Ned's like, "Oh, I hope war doesn't come, but if it does, have these things done first in case it does." And then she doesn't do either of those things. But moving right along, we get to chapter 21, Tyrion 3. Our point of view character is Tyrion Lannister, and the location is Castle Black. Tyrion is dining with the high officers of the Night's Watch on his last night at Castle Black. Lord Commander Mormont proclaims Tyrion a cunning man and asks him if he must leave so soon, saying that the Wall needs men like him. Tyrion brushes off the suggestion with an offer to scour the Seven Kingdoms for dwarves. An offended Alistair Thorne claims that Tyrion mocks the Watch, but Tyrion counters that he is only mocking Sir Alistair. Thorne demands that Tyrion make his japes with steel in hand. Tyrion replies that he already has steel in his hand, a fork, which he brandishes against Thorne in a mock attack. Like, I'm just picturing it in my head as I'm reading it, and yeah, it's pretty funny. A roar of laughter arises from the other officers, and Sir Alistair leaves in disgust. After claiming Sir Alistair's meal as the spoils of victory, Tyrion comments that a man like Sir Alistair should be mucking out the stables, not drilling the recruits. Mormont takes the opportunity to complain about the quality of his men. Sir Alistair is one of the few living knights to have taken the black.
I mean, makes sense, but also Tyrion does have a point. Like,
Yeah. Well,
this
if
man is too rough with everybody to be training.
well, it's interesting too because the wall is based off of Hadrian's Wall in Scotland. Like that's what George R. R. Martin, because he went to visit it and saw this massive structure that the Romans built, and was like, oh, which I think it's only like 10. I say only, but I think it's only like 10 feet tall in real life. But it's because the Romans were conquering everything. They marched through Britain and were conquering everything. And they got to Scotland and said, oh my God, these people are crazy. Just put up a big wall and keep them on the other side of it. And it's just interesting that like no one in this, like no one takes the Night's Watch seriously anymore in this world. And it's like, why would they build this gigantic ice wall if there wasn't a serious threat on the other side of it?
Right?
Yeah.
Like, what is the purpose? Like, why build anything like this unless there was purpose? Oh, well, they're dead on the other side. Okay, have you been to the other side? Do you know what's on the other side?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, all you have here is like wildlings trying to come over in mass now because they're terrified, and they're all like, "Oh no, we've seen some, man." Like,
And that's something too that I want to find out more about. Like, why did people choose to stay on that side of the wall when the wall went up? Like, what was
because
the
they say a lot about like, "Oh, we wanted to be the free people and like not be like ruled by anyone," but like,
yeah?
no, there had to be other reasons why they decided to stay over there. Like,
Well,
I
because
don't feel like that's a good enough reason given what we know is also on that side of the wall.
and I think too about how the Night's Watch has changed over the thousands of years, because we get stories about the Night's Watch before the Night King and
Mm-hmm.
or the Night's King. Sorry, the show confused me. But the Night's King, who was the 13th Lord Commander and took an other for a wife and fathered like children with her and stuff like that. That's where people theorize the vow about not taking wives and not having children come from, because the 13th Lord Commander was such an awful person. It took the combined forces of the wildlings beyond the wall and the King of the North at that time to defeat him. But I think maybe back in the day, the free folk or the wildlings were supposed to be part of the Night's Watch. Like they were like the Rangers or something. Like they had families and
Yeah.
stuff and lived on that side of the wall. And throughout the thousands of years of history, it just devolved into two separate types of people. I don't
Well,
know.
maybe they're not even, maybe it's not even that they were part of it, but they were the families of the Rangers and the families of the people that ran the wall.
Mhm.
And then those families had more families, and those families had more families. And suddenly there's a lot of people
Exactly.
that don't really answer to anyone because they don't answer to the realm
Mhm.
because they're not on that side of the wall.
Right.
And now you got people coming up with their own ideas hundreds of years later, like we
Yeah.
value our freedom, and that's what it becomes. So you're
Yeah.
the free people.
Right. Because the wildlings, they eat, they fight, and they make little wildlings. So like eventually they're going to come up with their own stories and backgrounds and everything. I just want to find out more about the origins of the free folk, the wildlings, whatever you want to call them, why they decided to be on that side of the wall when the wall went up. I think it would be interesting.
Yeah.
But Sir Jeremy Riker goes on to explain that both he and Thorne fought for King Aerys II Targaryen during the sack of King's Landing and were forced to take the Black or be executed by Tyrion's father, Lord Tywin Lannister. So right there we get an example of why Alistair Thorne hates the Starks
Yeah.
and hates the Lannisters. Tyrion's only comment is that his father is indeed very fond of heads on spikes. Tyrion asks for more wine, and Bowen Marsh comments that he has a great thirst for a small man. Maester Aemon states that Tyrion is a giant among them at the edge of the world. Tyrion, speechless at being called a giant, calls the Maester kind, which leaves the Maester equally amused. When they retire to the fire, Mormont informs Tyrion that he will receive an escort as far as Winterfell. Tyrion soon realizes that the Lord Commander is working his way up to asking a favor, and so he cuts right to it by asking if there is any way he can repay the Watch's kindness. Mormont beseeches Tyrion to speak to King Robert about the condition of the Night's Watch and its need for men. Mormont goes on to elaborate of the high rate of disappearances among the raging parties, including Sir Waymar Royce and Benjen Stark. The Watch's strength is now under 1,000 men, leaving only 3 men to guard each mile of the wall. Then Mormont laments that he is old and there is no one qualified to take over command because the Watch has become an army of sullen boys and old men. He has maybe 20 men that can read and fewer who can think or lead. Tyrion promises that he will tell the king, his father, and his brother, but he knows that it will do no good. Mormont then asks Tyrion how many winters he has seen. Tyrion replies with 9. Mormont adds that they have all been short. The long summer is ending, and portents say a long winter is coming. Tyrion suggests the fabled endless summer has come, and Mormont insists the days are already growing shorter. Mormont then confides to Tyrion that the wildlings are massing and moving south, running scared from something worse than just the cold. Tyrion, bored by Mormont's dark words, reiterates he promises and leaves. Outside, it is bitter cold. As he walks the castle ground, Tyrion is taken by a whim to climb the wall one last time. His legs are cramping too much to climb the stairs, so Tyrion takes the winch cage up. At the top, he meets Jon Snow with Ghost. As they walk, Tyrion asks how the recruits are doing under Jon's instructions. Jon tells him that they are getting better. Tyrion offers to carry any messages that Jon might have south to Winterfell and is rewarded with a torrent of requests. Most of all, Jon wants Tyrion to help his crippled brother Bran. At first, Tyrion denies that he has anything to offer Bran, but Jon insists that words will be enough. When Tyrion agrees, Jon thanks him from the heart and calls him friend. Tyrion, deeply moved by the gesture, quips that while many of his kin are bastards, Jon is the first that he could call a friend, and they shake hands.
Jon making friends with him while the other Starks are like, screw Tyrion.
Yeah.
He tried to hurt Bran.
They both look out over the haunted forest north of the wall. As they watch, Jon says that he has been watching for his uncle Benjen. Tyrion assures Jon that Benjen will return one day. When Jon declares that if his uncle does not come back, he and Ghost will go north to find him. Tyrion wonders who will go out searching for Jon and shivers at the thought.
I just want to say something because I was thinking about it. Like, they have trouble getting any men to come to the wall, right? And yet you have maesters, you have the King's Guard, you have other things that people devote their life to, and basically like that's it, they devote their life to it. And those things like people want to do, like people kind of want to go be. What are they saying about the Night's Watch that like nobody wants to go there? Like it's not seen as something that's like good. Like, oh, if I go that is a noble cause for me to go do.
Right. Well, the only characters that we really see coming from highborn families are people like Waymore Royce, who I forget if he's the second or third or fourth son of the Royce family, but he was basically just an extra son. There was nothing really for him to do, so he joined the Night's Watch. And Jon, who's a bastard, so he joined the Night's Watch because he's not going to inherit anything. No one's going to want to marry him for any political reasons, blah, blah, blah. And then you have, like, the Night's Watch is one of the things that you can do instead of, like, if you're a criminal, instead of paying a different penalty, you can join the Night's Watch instead. And it's cold. Like, it's an ice wall, and it's an ice wall all year long, regardless of if it's summer or winter. That's how far north it is that it's that cold. I mean, if
like, I get it, but this also kind of goes back to that, like, our talk when we were talking about the fact that, like, the Stark children are ill prepared. Like, are other children, like, in the South, like, no, that's just where we send the criminals, honey. You don't want to go there. And, like, clearly that's not how the Stark children look at it. The Stark children are like, oh, no, deserters of the wall are terrible people. We must behead them. Like,
no, I think that's exactly what it's like. I think you're 100% right with that comment. I think if you're born in the, I can maybe understand if you're not a noble, like maybe joining them, because otherwise, like, how are you going to get food, blah, blah, blah. At least the Night's Watch has a purpose for you. Like, you have some sort of purpose there.
Food, sleeping, like, shelter.
Yeah. But I think for most people, they would be like, no, the guy sleeping next to me murdered 3 people. How do I know he's not going to murder me in my sleep? There are no women. Like, yeah, there's Molestown and everything, but you're actually not supposed to go there. So they'd be like, no, there's no women. Like, I can understand how it got to the condition that it's in. We know as readers that it should be in a much better position than it's in, but and there's wildling raids. Like, you have to fight the wildlings if they show up. You have to fight these wild people. So I don't know. I kind of get it.
Yeah, but fighting is a glorious activity in these kind of worlds, so.
Yeah, but you could still die. There's still people.
True, but like, we obviously see boys all eager to go fight all the time in this world, so like.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know.
Moving on, though, I guess.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to chapter 22, Arya 2. Our point of view character is Arya Stark, and the location is King's Landing. When her father enters the small hall after dinner has already begun, Arya can tell that he has been fighting with the council again. Jory Cassell asks about the tourney everyone is talking about, and Eddard asks if anyone is talking about the Hand's displeasure with the whole idea. Sansa is tremendously excited by the prospect of a tourney and begs to be allowed to attend. When Septa Mordane mentions his family will be expected to attend, Eddard agrees to assure that seats are provided for both Sansa and Arya. Knowing that Prince Joffrey will be there, Arya insists that she does not want to attend a stupid tourney. When Sansa taunts Arya would not be wanted anyway, Eddard loses his temper and threatens to change his mind. Quickly regaining his composure, Eddard excuses himself. Once he is gone, his guardsmen start talking excitedly about the tourney. No one talks to Arya, but she likes it that way. Back in Winterfell, she had enjoyed listening to men talk. But now the sounds irritate her because she blames them all, even her father, for doing nothing to save Lady and Micah. After looking disgustedly at her cold food and the people around her, Arya pushes away from the table. When Septa Mordane insists that Arya hasn't eaten, she dashes away. She runs to her chamber and locks it herself. She digs to the bottom of her chest where her sword Needle is hidden. Arya thinks that if she could climb like her brother Bran, she could steal some food and run away, and that if Jon Snow was there, she would not feel so lonely. A soft knock on her door proves to be her father, who says they need to talk and asks politely to come in. From the way he talks, Arya is ashamed to realize he is more sad than angry. When she lets him in, her father immediately notices the sword and asks whose it is. Arya explains that it is hers, and her father asks to see it. He notices Micken's mark on the blade and remarks that if his 9-year-old daughter can be armed from his own forge without his knowledge, how could he be expected to rule the Seven Kingdoms?
Oh, good question, Ned.
Yeah. Eddard asks who gave her the sword, but Arya stays silent, not wanting to betray Jon. Her father accepts this, but tells Arya that a sword is not a toy. When he asks what she thinks Septa Mordane would say about her playing with a sword, Arya insists that she is not playing. Eddard states that he should break the sword over his knee. Arya responds that Needle won't break. The sword, having a name, amuses her father, who claims that Arya reminds him of his sister Lyanna, who might have carried a sword if their father had allowed it. Arya is surprised when Eddard says that she looks like her aunt, who was always described as beautiful, something never said of Arya.
All right, I have a note here,
Mhm.
mostly because, Arya looks like Lyanna, and then we know that Jon and Arya apparently look like, this is all I'm giving you, Lyanna Rhaegar people, okay? This is all I'm giving you right now.
Yeah.
So if we're taking that Jon and Arya also look fairly alike, so are we alluding to the fact that Jon does look kind of like Lyanna too then?
Yeah.
Like, that's all I'm giving you, Lyanna and Rhaegar people. That's all I'm giving you here. But
yeah. No, like, and the thing is too, is that Eddard obviously knew Lyanna when she was a child and knew what she would grow up to look like later in life, or later in her life, I guess I should say. So if he recognizes Arya looking like her now, even, I've known people in real life, not just girls, but boys too, who when they were young didn't look cute. Like, they were not ugly, but they just didn't look cute. And then they became beautiful people when they got older. Like, people can change how they look over the years. And
it easily happens. You're
yeah,
right.
the ugly
Yeah,
duckling.
like, I just, like, It's definitely something that struck me because they do make a mark that like Jon and Arya look alike, and that was, if
Yeah,
if we're going with the Rhaegar and Lyanna thing, like this is probably one of those few things where I'm like,
right.
like this is probably one of the few things that I would like go, yes, this obviously alludes to this.
This is the thing that people cling to when they argue for Rhaegar and Lyanna being Jon. Like that Arya looks like Lyanna and Arya and Jon look similar. But the thing is that they both look like their father, and all the other children look like Lady Stark. Like,
Yeah.
and it's stressed how much Jon looks like Ned. Like you can see the North in him and everything. I I don't know. You could argue about how that means Ned has more recessive genes than Catelyn does. I've watched videos about people explaining how where werewood trees are in the castles affect what the children look like when they're born and stuff like there's a lot of factors going on here and a lot of theories and conspiracies about different things, but the fact of the matter is John's age doesn't add up for being the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna. Like it just doesn't. The timeline doesn't work with Jon being the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna. He wouldn't be 15. He would only be roughly 13 or maybe about to be 14 to be the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna. It just in the timeline of events, the way that they happened, it does. The only way that it could work is if at the tourney of Harrenhal, Rhaegar impregnated Lyanna there. Like that's literally the only way that it could work, that Jon is their
And the
child.
pregnancy was just hidden and nobody knew about it.
Yeah,
Basically.
yeah. But it just doesn't work in the timeline otherwise. Sorry, R plus L equals J fans. You're wrong. Like you got to have the show and look at how great that was. What did it matter that Jon was a Targaryen on the show? Like
it really didn't.
It didn't. Like everything that Jon does is to deny him. Like he doesn't want to be the king of the North, even though they make him the king of the North. He doesn't want to be the king of the Seven Kingdoms, even though some people try to thrust that on him. Like, what was the purpose of him being a Targaryen? So he could ride a dragon in a couple episodes? Like, what did that really do? Like, nothing. All right. Let me calm down. Let me get back into this. Okay. So Eddard asks Arya if she knows anything about how to use a sword, and she replies with the advice Jon gave her to stick them with the pointy end. She then tells how she was trying to learn and sadly adds that she asked Micah to practice with her. In grief, she starts to sob against her father's chest. He tells her that Micah's death was not her fault. Arya sobs that she hates all of them: the queen, the hound, Joffrey, and the king. She then adds that Joffrey lied and that she also hates Sansa. Eddard says that everyone lies and he does not believe that Nymeria ran off. Arya then exclaims that Jory promised not to tell. Eddard informs her that Jory did not tell, but that he had it figured out, because even a blind man could tell that the wolf would not have left her willingly. Arya then explains how she and Jory had to throw rocks to drive the wolf away. Then she asks her father if she did the right thing, and Eddard assures her that she did. Eddard then tells Arya that winter is coming. He explains to her how wolves stick together and that in wintertime, the lone wolf dies. Now there are enemies threatening the Starks, so they must stick together like a pack of wolves, and it is time for her to start growing up. He hands Arya back her sword, saying she can keep it. He only asks that she not stick her sister with it. Within 3 sorry. Go ahead.
I would also be like, yeah, maybe I'll stick Sansa with this. Like,
yeah. 3 days later, Arya is sent to the small hall by the steward. She is met by Syrio Farrell, a former First Sword of Bravos. He tells her that he is her dancing master and throws a wooden sword, which she cannot catch. Unperturbed, Syrio tells Arya that the next day she will be there midday and catch the blade. She picks up the practice sword as instructed and finds it very heavy. When she complains about the weight, Syrio explains that it is too heavy to make her strong. He then fixes her grip, telling her not to squeeze too tight. When Arya says that she might drop it, Syrio tells her that the sword must become a part of her arm and that she cannot drop a part of her arm. When Syrio calls her a boy for the third time, Arya objects. He insists that it does not matter. A sword has no gender. He then explains that what he will be teaching her is not the hacking and hammering iron dance of Westeros, but the swift and sudden water dance of Braavos. He then tells her to try and strike him, and she tries unsuccessfully for hours until every muscle is sore. The next day, the real work begins. The thing that I do like about this scene in the show is that we see Ned watching over this
Yeah.
instructions that Sirio's giving her, and we hear the sounds of battle in the background, like Ned
Yeah.
hearing it. Like Ned is a character that has PTSD, and it's never really addressed in the show aside from that. But he does like suffer from having gone to war at such a young age and gone through the things that he went through.
Which is unsurprising.
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, war is going to cause PTSD, to be honest, in anyone at any age. So,
right. Yeah, especially seeing the things that Ned saw while he was at war.
yeah.
And we don't even know all the full detail. But I mean, even when the war ends, his sister dies in front of him. So he's been through a lot. Is there anything else you'd like to say about these book chapters, or should we?
I will say about like the Arya stuff here. This kind of start of like kind of the work that goes into kind of her own personal disassociation with herself, almost like it's really starting here with the "you're a sword, you're a boy," like.
And really, with Arya, with later books, I'll say not later chapters because it's later
Yes.
books. So spoilers for anyone who doesn't want to listen. The only thing that keeps her Stark identity for her is the wolf dreams. Like whenever she goes, yeah, whenever she goes to sleep, she inhabits Nymeria's body and has dreams about what Nymeria is doing. Well, actually, she does it. It's not even Nymeria doing it. It's her in Nymeria's body doing things. Aside from that, she really starts to disassociate her identity of who she is and everything.
Yeah, and that's kind of just a factor in how she's being trained. Like even right here, she's slowly being kind of indoctrinated into this weird disassociative state of a being.
Right. And the very few chapters of Winds of Winter that George has made public, Arya is much different. She's a much different character in that book than she is here and what she was on the show. I recently sent you an article about how George R. R. Martin wanted the show to be very different. He wanted it to be 10 seasons, and he was very disappointed at the storyline, that what they did with the storyline, because he said it was very different than what he had planned out. So I think we're going to get to see, if we ever get to see the next book, we're going to see very different things than what the show gave us. And I would imagine Arya is one of those characters where we'll especially see very different things.
Oh yeah, because I think they kind of washed over a lot of her character towards the end.
Like the one chapter that I'm thinking of specifically in Winds of Winter that he's made public is called Mercy, and Arya is on a mission for the Faceless Men, and she became this.
I've read that one. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's disturbing because of Arya's extremely young age, but she's very different than anything that she did on the TV show, and I think Arya's character is going to go in a very different direction than anything the TV show did with her.
I think a lot of the characters are going to go in a fairly different direction.
Yeah. Besides what happened with Sansa marrying Ramsay, that I don't think will happen at all in the books. That's going to be very, very different. But I could see Sansa going in a similar direction overall. Like I could see her becoming the heir of Winterfell, and maybe even if the Seven Kingdoms break up or something, like her becoming the Queen of the North. I could, like, Sansa has a very different arc. I think where she's going to get to might end up the same, but I think she's going to have a very different journey to get there. But yeah. And we'll discuss Jon and Daenerys and the rest of them another time, I guess.
Yes.
But so
Uh,
that's all for this
and
episode, or go ahead.
no, well, it's not really episode related to this. I just wanted to mention because we're doing fantasy related thing. I've been watching The Wheel of Time. Jason is not watching it, but that's fine. If you want to hear anything and hear my thoughts on it, I am more than willing to do one of the Ashley episodes and ramble a bit for y'all. But I don't know
Yeah.
if I want to. I'm not enjoying it, in case any of you want to know. But if you want to hear why I'm not enjoying it, let us know, and I'll give a ranty rant.
Yeah. I think also I might check it out. I've never read the books, so it would be interesting if I did check it out because this would be my exposure to it, and maybe I would have a different opinion from you. I don't know.
Like I said, I've only read the first book,
mm,
and I didn't like. I don't really like the book either, so I don't think that helps. But I also think what they've done with the characters in the book versus the show is a little different, and I'm not sure I'm a fan of it. But we can get into that if we do an episode.
Yeah. Maybe too, since we're throwing things out there sort of fantasy related, if you'd like to hear us do an episode about Dune, I recently watched the movie. You watched the movie, I believe.
I did not, but
Oh,
I
you did
can
not?
go watch it.
Okay, but you've read the books. I listened to the
I have read the
audiobook.
book.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook, and I also watched the 84 version of the movie, which I enjoyed more than the new one. Not that the new one wasn't good, it was very well made, but in my opinion, it took itself very super seriously, which just from listening to the audiobook and from watching the 84 movie, I feel like Dune has to be a little bit silly. Like it's a little bit silly in its concept.
It's a little bit campy, I admit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I never read any of the other books, but I, have heard people discuss and read wikis about where the series goes, and I think, well, it gets very serious, very silly. So, and nothing against Frank Herbert or his son Brian or anything. When you're sort of creating a genre like space fantasy, like if you're the first one to do it or the first one to make a big success out of it, you're laying the groundwork. I'm poorly expressing myself, but without the silliness of Dune, we wouldn't end up getting something serious like A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones. You have to have things like obviously there was Tolkien, then there was Herbert, and then there was Martin. And without that path, we wouldn't have gotten what we got with A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones. But yeah, let us know. Ashley's interested in doing an episode on the Wheel of Time. Maybe we'll do an episode on Dune as well. So without anything else, I think I'll go into the outro.
All right, sounds good.
This has been the Once Again podcast. Any questions, comments, or critiques can be addressed to our email at onceagainpod@gmail.com. Follow us on our social media accounts, Once Again Pod, all one word, on Twitter and Instagram. If you would like to contribute to the podcast, we have several tiers available on patreon.com/onceagainpod. As always, a like, follow, or share would be greatly appreciated. Thank you and have a wonderful day. And remember, we will entertain you. We will always entertain you.